I'd just like to say that Carol and I are absolutely delighted by today's announcement and thrilled at the prospect of a wedding sometime next year.
For years, the Middletons were the picture of British middle-class success. They had charm, discipline, and a daughter destined to be queen. But behind the polished family portraits and the composed appearances at royal weddings, something was quietly unraveling. The perfect family image, held together by soft smiles and silent nods, was not as seamless as the public believed. Kate Middleton, always the symbol of grace under pressure, has recently begun to shed light on the private world she grew up in. And what she's revealing, even in subtle ways, is a far cry from the fairy tale most people imagined. Her parents, Carol and Michael Middleton, may have once looked like the model couple, but those who knew them privately say their relationship was far from romance. So what really went on behind the quiet smiles and carefully posed family moments? Is there more to the Middletons' story than meets the eye? Let's uncover the truth behind the royal in-laws' carefully protected image. The silence between Carol and Michael. People close to the family describe the Middletons' marriage as calm. Yes, but distant. There was an unspoken formality between them. Even at home, a family acquaintance shared that Carol seemed to be in charge of everything, while Michael lingered in the background, quietly supportive but emotionally removed. They rarely touched. They weren't the type to bicker, but they also weren't the type to reach for each other in a crowded room. That absence of connection didn't go unnoticed by their children. In fact, it shaped them. Kate, especially, often fell into the role of mediator. Even in light-hearted interviews, she showed a tendency to keep the tone steady, to manage emotions in the room, to take control without looking like she was taking control. According to those familiar with the royal household, this is a behavior pattern shaped by a home that demanded emotional balance at all times. At the center of it all was Party Pieces, the family business Carol launched in 1987. It wasn't just a company, it was Carol's mission. Born from the family's kitchen table, it gave her purpose, status, and a route out of the shadows of her former career as a flight attendant. She built the business with discipline and direction. Michael supported her, but not in a leading role. His involvement was passive, quiet, more backstage crew than business partner. Party Pieces wasn't just how they paid the bills, it was how they built the Middleton brand. Success at Party Pieces meant upward mobility, financial security, and social respectability. And for years, it worked. The business helped position the family in the right social circles, the kind where a daughter meeting a future king didn't seem out of place. But when the business began to collapse financially, so did the illusion of invincibility. The company quietly folded, its debts stacking up, and its former prestige reduced to headlines about unpaid bills. The financial trouble didn't just hit the brand, it hit the foundation of the family's identity. And through it all, Carol kept working. Michael stayed quiet and the dynamic simply became more visible. As the cracks in her family's image became harder to ignore, Kate began stepping back. Her once visible closeness to the Middletons has cooled in recent years, insiders say. She still presents the image of a loyal daughter, but the warmth has subtly faded. And lately, in private conversations and select public moments, she's begun to share glimpses of what her childhood actually looked like. She doesn't offer dramatic confessions. She doesn't point fingers. But the way she speaks about her family now feels more grounded, more real, and more removed from the myth the public once believed. It's as if she's gently correcting the narrative. What started as a cheerful home business soon became the heaviest weight on the Middleton family. Party Pieces, once a symbol of ambition and clever marketing, slowly turned into a pressure cooker for Carol and Michael's marriage. It thrived in the early 2000s, especially when Kate's royal romance put an unspoken spotlight on the brand. The business was everywhere. Quiet product tie-ins, theme sets that mirrored royal aesthetics, and marketing choices that walked a fine line between subtle and obvious. But behind the pastel packaging and smiling photos, things were tense. Carol, described by former employees as relentless when it came to image and growth, began to push harder every time numbers dipped. She didn't take setbacks lightly. When the market changed or sales slowed, her answer was always to double down. New products, more publicity, bigger plans. She was determined to turn a party business into a global name. Michael didn't see it that way. He was more reserved, more cautious, and according to one insider, far more skeptical about the financial risks Carol was taking in the company's final years. He reportedly spoke up often, warning against overextending the brand, urging restraint. His concerns didn't land. Carol had a vision, and she was set on chasing it, whether or not Michael was on board. But even the strongest family front can't hold forever when cracks start to show, especially when business and marriage begin to blur. The collapse of party pieces. By 2023, the warning signs could no longer be ignored. The numbers stopped adding up, and optimism wasn't enough to keep the shelves stocked or the suppliers quiet. Years of soft sales chipped away at the foundation. Management missteps only made things worse. Add to that rising debt and a rapidly changing retail landscape, and Party Pieces was no longer the cheery success story it had once been. Eventually, the company entered administration, a polite business term for financial freefall. What followed wasn't just a matter of unpaid invoices, it was a financial fallout. One supplier claimed he was owed over £300,000, and others soon came forward with similar complaints. The damage left a stain on a family brand that had long built its reputation on being reliable and respectable. But behind the financial chaos was something more personal. Sources close to the family say the failure of Party Pieces wasn't just a business disaster. It marked a breaking point in Carol and Michael's relationship. A close friend described it as a loss that went deeper than money. Years of work, sacrifice, and effort now felt wasted. What once united them had become the thing that finally split them apart. Kate, already under intense public pressure as the Princess of Wales, was said to be deeply hurt, not by the bankruptcy itself, but by the visible distance it created between her parents. They were no longer the team she had known growing up. The collapse not only hit their finances, it seemed to pull away whatever emotional connection still remained. Carol kept up appearances, though those close to her say it took visible effort. Michael, on the other hand, stepped back further than ever before. He wasn't just quiet, he was absent. For a man once seen as the family's calm center, that withdrawal felt more like a retreat. Michael Middleton had long been viewed as the gentle balance to Carol's sharp determination. He was steady, soft-spoken, and seemed content in the background. But according to those who knew the family well, that quiet nature slowly evolved into emotional distance. Over the years, he became less engaged, less emotionally available, not just to Carol, but to his children too. At first, it was small things: missed conversations, a habit of deferring decisions to Carol, an increasing disinterest in events or meetings. He was still physically present, always by Carol's side, but something about him started to dim. A family acquaintance later remarked that he hadn't just stepped back, he had emotionally checked out. He didn't argue, didn't engage, didn't push back. He simply let Carol steer everything, even when her choices were questionable. As Party Pieces tried to grow into something larger and the public spotlight on Kate intensified, the pressure on the Middleton image multiplied. Carol leaned into it, crafting their public identity with surgical precision. Michael, however, quietly pulled away. He wasn't just modest. He seemed emotionally absent. While Carol took meetings with etiquette experts and fussed over every social appearance, Michael was barely visible. One royal staffer observed that it was easy to forget he was even in the room. Within the extended family and even among palace aides, whispers grew louder. It became hard to ignore the reality that Carol and Michael were, in many ways, living separate lives. Outwardly, they appeared united. They smiled at public functions, stood together in family photos, and kept up the performance. But behind closed doors, those who knew them well believed Michael had stopped investing emotionally in the relationship. He wasn't involved in the business anymore, nor was he contributing to the finely tuned machinery that kept their public image intact. Kate, always graceful under pressure, was reportedly well aware of this shift. Close friends said she once described her father as gentle but unreachable, a comment that, while polite, revealed a deeper emotional truth.
Okay, no, this one I should be fine. But I did get a bit emotional when I sang it in there because it's just like unbelievable venue.
Some believe that Kate's composed and reserved persona isn't just the result of royal training, but a lifetime of learning how to remain calm around emotional silence. Her father's withdrawal, quiet as it was, had left a mark. What made it worse was the stillness of it. There were no explosive arguments or obvious signs of dysfunction, just silence, a slow retreat. Carol kept moving, always managing, always planning. Michael, by contrast, faded further into the background until he barely cast a shadow at all. Carol in command. While Michael stepped back, Carol stepped up, even more than before. She wasn't just running a business, she was managing a brand. Party pieces had always been her vision, but it was more than that. She also curated the Middleton family image with a level of attention that rivaled any PR firm. Every detail mattered. Whether at garden parties or royal receptions, Carol had a hand in it all. To outsiders, her ambition was impressive. She had built something from nothing. She had guided her daughter through the world's most intense media scrutiny. But inside the family, her need for control was different. Friends and colleagues described her as focused to the point of inflexibility. Deviations were unwelcome. Suggestions were rarely entertained. One person who had worked with her said that even when Kate was still dating William, everything had to be rehearsed. How they dressed, how they smiled, what they said in interviews. Carol had a vision of perfection, and she expected everyone to play along. There wasn't much space for messiness or emotion or honest disagreement. For Michael, this meant his measured caution was often ignored. For Kate and her siblings, it meant growing up in a household where love came with conditions. Appearances mattered. Performance mattered. Vulnerability, not so much. Looking back, some believe that Carol's relentless standards didn't just strain her marriage, they helped sink party pieces too. The same obsession with flawless presentation may have blinded her to the warning signs. While she doubled down, expanded the brand, and tried to turn a small business into a global player, the numbers quietly collapsed, and with them, the stability that had once defined the family. As the family business struggled and debts piled up, Carol Middleton didn't back down. Instead of being open about the problems, she tightened her grip on control, branding, and denial. A former employee said Carol simply couldn't allow the family's image to slip, no matter how bad things got. Even as everything started to fall apart, she acted like nothing was wrong. That kind of stress changes a person. Kate Middleton, who has mastered royal calm over the years, is believed to have inherited this emotional toughness from her mother. But insiders also say it's created distance between them. Kate knows, more than most, realize, that some of her reserved nature comes from watching her mother put appearances ahead of honesty. Now, facing intense public scrutiny and personal challenges, Kate seems more willing to admit how costly that control has been. She has told close aides that her childhood felt structured but distant. That simple phrase says a lot about growing up under Carol's need for perfection. The marriage between Carol and Michael wasn't so much a partnership as a carefully managed project, requiring constant adjustment, emotional restraint, and strict loyalty to their public image. As cracks begin to show in that image, the silence that once held their story together starts to break too. But behind the polished family photos and rehearsed smiles, someone was always working quietly to keep the peace. Kate's role as the family mediator. The media paints a picture of Kate as raised in comfort and love, a classic English upbringing fit for a future queen. But those close to her reveal a more complicated truth. Kate didn't just grow up as Carol and Michael's daughter. She was the quiet mediator between two parents who lived alongside each other rather than truly connected. People from Kate's inner circle say her role as the family's emotional anchor began long before she married into royalty. One acquaintance described Carol as intense and Michael as passive, with Kate naturally stepping in to manage the mood at home without anyone telling her to. She just knew how to keep the peace. This isn't unusual in families where one parent dominates and the other withdraws. It's called the parentified child pattern, where a child takes on adult-like emotional responsibilities, often sacrificing their own needs. That early trade-off may explain why Kate is so composed under pressure and why she handles enormous public expectations with such grace. But it also suggests a childhood defined not by chaos, but by constant emotional balancing. Even as a child, Kate didn't throw tantrums. A former neighbor told a writer that even at 10 years old, Kate seemed to be managing something bigger than herself. Her younger siblings, Pippa and James, didn't appear to be as aware of these tensions, possibly because Kate absorbed much of the emotional weight between their parents. When arguments happened, which was rare and mostly private, Kate reportedly withdrew instead of speaking up. That instinct to hide feelings rather than express them has shaped her public persona and royal role. For years, the story about Kate Middleton's upbringing was neat and tidy. It painted a picture of a stable, supportive family rooted in solid middle-class values, standing in sharp contrast to the drama that often surrounded Prince William's side of the family. But recently, that story has started to change, not with grand announcements, but through what's been left unsaid. People began to notice small signs. Michael Middleton's absence from royal events grew more obvious, even when his grandchildren were involved. Carol showed up alone at high-profile occasions, keeping a subtle distance from the royal circle, especially after the party planning business scandal broke. Even Kate, usually very careful with her words, started referring to her parents more separately.
They make a lovely couple. They're great fun to be with, and we've had a lot of laughs together.
One former royal aide remembered a moment during a 2023 charity event. Someone praised Kate for growing up in a loving home. She smiled, but there was a quick flicker of something like pain. Then she said she learned a lot about people and how not to ignore silence. That phrase has become a quiet code among insiders. It points to the long years Kate spent managing family problems through denial and keeping up appearances. Though fiercely protective of her family, sources say Kate no longer wants to uphold a false story. The idea of a perfect Middleton marriage no longer fits her truth, and she's starting to share that truth carefully. The palace has been quietly aware of these tensions for some time. Aides have been balancing Kate's loyalty to her parents with preparing for questions about the party business scandal. The embarrassment of unpaid debts was one thing, but the emotional fallout could be much harder to handle, especially if it goes public. Rumors began circulating softly at first, then grew louder in gossip columns, suggesting Carol and Michael were living separate lives. They haven't officially split, but insiders say their relationship is more polite cohabitation than marriage. A royal biographer put it bluntly, "They aren't a couple anymore. They're a brand holding together on a broken foundation." Kate is left to pick up the pieces, with her own health struggles, the demands of motherhood, and the pressures of her future as queen. She carries the burden of protecting the dignity of both her birth family and the royal family. Kate has reportedly pushed back on divorce rumors, saying her parents are just finding a new way to balance things under different circumstances. For the first time, Kate is showing the world that her story is more complicated than any fairy tale. And the palace, long dependent on the illusion of family harmony, may have no choice but to rewrite the script. What the royal family missed. Discretion, unity, and appearances have always been the British royal family's top priorities. The Middletons fit right in as calm, composed, and scandal-free in-laws. But now, as the truth about Carol and Michael's marriage comes to light, insiders are wondering how no one saw it coming. From the beginning of Kate's relationship with Prince William, the palace viewed the Middletons as a steady, stabilizing presence. Unlike the families of other royal partners who often brought drama and tabloid headlines, the Middletons appeared polished, hardworking, private, and loyal. One senior palace aide even called them the anti-Pensers, referring to Princess Diana's famously turbulent family. But behind the scenes, there were warning signs. Michael Middleton's avoidance of royal events wasn't just shyness. He was missing from many gatherings where Carol appeared alone. At first, this was explained as just his personality, but over time it seemed more deliberate. Carol, on the other hand, was seen as a force to reckon with. Those courting her described her as formidable and protective, pushing back against palace advice and wanting more control over Kate's life than was usual. She wasn't just a mother-in-law. According to one insider, she acted more like a political advisor, quietly shaping decisions behind the scenes. The palace kept its distance, maybe too much. A former communications officer said they never really looked deeper into what was happening within the Middleton family. They didn't want to upset the balance. After all, the Middletons were good for the royal brand. But now that brand is under scrutiny. The financial instability of the party planning business exposed cracks, and the marriage between Carol and Michael Middleton is reportedly strained, reaching a point of emotional separation. The royal household is said to be reconsidering what it missed, perhaps even planning to keep Kate at a discreet distance from her parents going forward. For Kate, this change is complicated. She has always fiercely defended her family in public, even as tensions grew privately. But as her responsibilities within the monarchy increase and her own health challenges mount, there are signs she may be stepping back from that protective role. Not with public statements or scandals, but through silence and space. In the royal world, such silence speaks volumes. Where does that leave the Middleton family? Once seen as flawless, they now stand frayed and closely watched under a harsher royal spotlight. The fairy tale was never perfect, but for years, Kate was both its heroine and its protector, carefully crafting a family story that fit the crown's polished image. Now, as the myth fades, what's left isn't scandal, but a sobering reality. Carol Middleton remains a strong presence, but her influence is fading. With the party business gone and her role as the capable matriarch weakened, she focuses more on her grandchildren. Sources say she is still welcome at Kensington Palace, but her presence is quieter, less confident. Michael Middleton has almost disappeared from public view, whether because of emotional withdrawal, health problems, or personal choice. His role has become mostly ceremonial. The man once seen as the strong, silent partner is now mostly just silent. Meanwhile, Kate is facing the hardest challenge yet, quietly separating who she is from where she came from. People close to her say she isn't abandoning her parents, but she's drawing a clear line between their past and her future.
Having been lucky enough to meet some of our country's amazing charities and organizations,
one confidant described it as a kind of grief, not just mourning a marriage that was never perfect, but also the loss of the belief that she could keep everything together. The Middletons were the Crown's perfect supporting cast for many years, but now the silence around them feels heavier. Kate is still protecting her family, but not in the way she used to. She's not covering the cracks anymore. Instead, she's just learning to live with them. Behind palace gates, it's not betrayal. It's evolution. A quiet shift that says the fairy tale might not be broken, but it's no longer pretending to be perfect either. Do you think Kate is rewriting her story, or just revealing what was always there? Let us know your thoughts.